Hey everybody, with my friend Leigh Steinberg. Great to see him after a fantastic Super Bowl party that my mom is still coming down from, and still, so am I, and a bunch of other people. Again, before I continue, Leigh, I wanted to say thank you very much for including us in such a fantastic event.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Now, we got something else that is a major problem, as you know, because you've been talking about it all day long, and I'd like to talk about it here. It's more important to me than the NFL moving around, although that is important in the draft. What's going on with these betting scandals?
So, if you remember, for the whole history of professional sports, there was a huge, impregnable wall between gambling and pro sports and collegiate sports. And so, teams were not supposed to be involved with gamblers, athletes were not supposed to be involved with gamblers, no teams in Las Vegas, a real separation. And all that changed so that we've had a quick flush. So you now can place a bet if you go to a Washington Commanders game or to a Bulls game in the arena or adjacent to the arena or stadium. You have two NFL owners who own part of DraftKings. You have widespread advertising in stadium for Indian casinos and DraftKings and the rest of it. It happened really, really rapidly. And Las Vegas had two teams and they had the Super Bowl. So it happened really. The danger has always been the existential threat to professional sports, because nothing is slowing down the whirlwind that is the television gate and marketing machine in professional sports today. We know bad behavior by athletes doesn't derail sports because we have plenty of it, and they remain very popular. But here's what would. If the perception of fans is that the game is not played on a level playing field with both parties trying as hard as they can, it's not a real contest, then if you erode that public trust in the whole veracity of the athletic contest, then you go down a slippery slope to wrestling, which is an entertainment and not a sport. It's a television show and not really a competitive sport.
It's scripted.
So that's the problem with this. And so the greatest nightmare that a league or a team could have just happened, which is Jonte Porter went out of two games early. They have a bet now called a prop bet. And that bet establishes a baseline as to how many points that player will score, how good he'll do, and you can bet the under or over. So a player coming out of a game early, if the general public doesn't know about that, it's going to change. And they found a ton of money was coming in on the under after the game in January. And then it happened again in March 20th. And they got evidence that this player had told a gambler what he was going to do and when he was going to come out. And that gambler then made a fortune by betting the under. That's got ramifications like fixing a game. And you simply can't have that in pro sports, because if fans ever think they're watching an exhibition that's more entertaining than it is a real sport, we have major problems. The other problem would be if an athlete has gambling debts and is in debt, and part of their ability to pay off the debt is shaving or altering performance. Now, just to give you a perspective, so it's years ago, and Steve Young's playing for the 49ers. So I go to the hotel on that Saturday night before the game, and he's sitting in his room, and Charles Haley ran him over in practice. He just knocked him over. And Steve's now injured, and he's not going to be able to play. I left that hotel and gone and placed a fortune on the other team. I could have made a fortune, but that's why none of us involved in any way in sport can be involved in this way. You have to keep inside information inside. You have to make sure that you're not shaving performance.
Hey, the NFL has made fun of this online idea or notion that games are scripted. And I say made fun because during the Super Bowl, they had Keenan Michael Key uh, talking about the script for the games. Do you think that under the circumstances, maybe they should pull back on that kind of playfulness? And because to me, it implies not really taking the whole matter seriously. I mean, I'm happy to be wrong.
Um, the one thing I can tell you is players are so competitive that the actual chance that you'd have somebody shave performance is very slight. Um, in other words, people say, well, it's the end of the year. The games don't matter. But the film matters from those games on whether the team's going to keep the player for the next year. The film matters on those games in terms of how big a salary they could have. So I don't think that has much of an impact.
Now, will the betting eventually extend to high school and college sports? And what about the controls there?
There are none. And so one of the points about these prop bets is you can bet on anything. You can bet on who wins the coin toss and who gets the first kickoff or who scores the first points or who does anything. There are endless amounts of bets. And now you can walk up to the snack bar in the Commander's Stadium, and as well as buy a hot dog, you can place a bet.
Mm-hmm.
So bettors want to bet on anything. So if they could get a number of people interested in betting on a high school sport, and they can take the Las Vegas can take their percentage, they're happy to do it. You can bet on all sorts of events in the world. You know, how long the Pope will live for, and ridiculous things.
So, are we talking about exceptions that prove the rule? Because one could make the argument that, hey, we caught him, as opposed to this having gone on for years and not catched him and see the system works. What about that? What about that notion?
So we have no idea how much of this may have occurred. The way they caught him was they have a metric that can track the amount of money bet on a single thing, and an extraordinary, unusual amount of money came in on the under, and so they were able to say something's wrong here, but they didn't used to be able to track it. So we don't know how much of this may or may not have occurred from the Black Sox at this time.
Wow. Hey, so shifting gears now, let's talk about the draft where you made your money and fame and success. And this is my company's 20th straight year credentialed NFL draft media. And on the 20th anniversary of this, I have to ask you this question. And it's a basic question. How, from your perspective, has the draft changed? And within that, is it a good idea to keep moving it around?
So remember that the draft used to be in January in football. It was the year I started with Steve Bartkowski, and they had like 15 rounds, and then they cut it back to 12 rounds, which they had for a number of years, and then 10 rounds. So the first thing is it's much less rounds, less players are drafted. The second thing is to be able to follow the draft back in 1980. I sat with a player at his house, and the only way you knew that the draft had occurred is when the team called the player to tell him he was drafted. They would print the results the next day in the newspaper. So all this amazing event building that they've done to create not just a day, but a week of programming, to create 2 different networks covering it, to turn it into this spectacle where you may have, I haven't looked, but you may have network coverage of the first round next year, so next week, so it's accessible to everyone. This all happened. The star building, the sponsorships, the content, the NFL figured out a way to take that long off season they have where football fans were missing football and fill it up with events. So you now have the football season followed by the Super Bowl and the Pro Bowl and franchise players and free agency and the scouting combine and on and on. And then the announcement of the schedule for the league, which is pretty trippy. And that's now a big TV show. So no, this is they've blown this up to amazing proportions, and it helps in the branding. So these four quarterbacks that figure to go in the first four picks already are going to get a big build up before they go into pro sports.
Are we too quarterback happy? And here's where I'm going with this. I'm going to lay out a statement. The passing, yes, is tremendous, phenomenal, all over the place. It's also sloppy. And I would argue, and I'd love for Bill Walsh to be alive to talk with him about what he sees. But since you know Bill, I interviewed him once, you know him. What would Bill Walsh say about a quarterback today and what Steve Young and others and myself argue is a very sloppy brand of passing game?
It depends on the system that individual team has. It's their developmental philosophy for how quickly to bring that quarterback into starting into play. It's having the right quarterback coach and offensive coordinator. It's having the support of players that can keep the quarterback upright and the rest of it. So you're going to see four players drafted and at the top of this draft. And the chance that they'll all be amazing successes, somebody or two out of it will be a flop. And the reason for that is they get pushed into service with a team that doesn't have a good ownership, good front office, good coaching staff, and they don't develop a player well. So he'll go in as a rookie. He'll play 3 games when the field is much faster and he needs a couple of years to adjust. He'll play 3 games and be judged to be a bust. And you got talk radio and the internet and everyone. And so they've magnified the level of pressure. He gets drafted high, paid a lot of money. They don't have a good incumbent. Bam, he starts. Is that the right way? Might be, might not be.
Now, what do you think Bill Walsh would say about all this?
That you need the right player, but you need to develop the player correctly. So he used to do things like have Steve Young look at every interception he had thrown and try to go over it carefully. He had ways of being a pedagogue, a teacher, that and he had a system where they scripted the first 15 plays, and so it was set up for the quarterback to succeed. So he'd say, it's not by chance that Mac Wilson or the quarterbacks of the Jets and Patriots both boomed out, or Mitch Trubisky, or a number of different players. He'd say it's a function of the system.
Is it fair to say, having said that Andy Reid is the modern Bill Walsh?
Oh, very much so. They're in the same sort of pattern because Bill was an innovator ahead of his time, and he's the progenitor of the modern passing game. So they played a different way. Remember, before that, football was played run on first down, run on second, and maybe you take a chance to throw on third. And now you pass on first down, maybe you pass on second, and sort of integrate the running game. But that's all Bill Walsh and his coaching tree. Because not just him, it's all the coaches underneath him that went on to become head coaches. So that philosophy spread.
Now, another question, shifting gears, this has to do with the draft still, but also from a different perspective. It seems now that a significant portion, if not the majority, of agents that have successfully steered quarterbacks to contracts are black. And that's maybe still going back, and I was looking at that. Wow, and I know that you had another black agents working under your group organization for some time, but when did it turn around? And is this something that is, I hope, sustainable, or where are we with this? Because we have the young lady Nikki, I believe.
Well, it was the development of some pretty effective young black attorneys and agents who understood how to recruit, who understood how to build a career, and yes, it's sustainable. To say nothing of the fact we're talking about drafts now, that when Warren Moon came into the league, just favored a black playing quarterback, and now between Mahomes and Lamar Jackson, the MVPs for the last years have been those players. I mean, and Lamar has two, and Patrick, and it's not a big deal. And even better, the fact they have backup African American quarterbacks. So right. It's just what was part of my consciousness with Warren and Cordell Stewart is now gone. So that's a great thing.
So now in the draft also, I want to get, since we're talking about drafts and players that have hit it big, but let's take a look. And I don't want to keep talking without mentioning the sudden success of Caitlin Clark, but I'm going to ask a very open-ended question. From your perspective, how is her success impacting men's sports? I'm going to leave it just like that.
So let's talk about women's sports first. This last women's tournament was a transformational event. It propelled women's sports into American consciousness like nothing has done since the women won the World Cup in soccer. And the numbers were spectacular. 12 million people watched the semifinals. A cum of 18.7 million people watched the finals, but it got as high as 24 million. That's a serious number. That is just
Oscar level, man. Wow.
That just hadn't happened before. And they star-built Caitlin Clark and Paige Buckles and Angela Reese, and a number of different players got built. That's their breakthrough. And then they'll play again in the summer. I would turn on, I have presets for sports talk radio on my car. So I was going between them a week ago. They're all talking about women's basketball.
Yeah.
I watched the semifinals and the finals because I got caught up in it. I've never done that before. And all of a sudden, it's a big breakthrough event. But it just reestablishes for men's sports the chance that some of the people pulled into women's sports will become big sports fans, and maybe that can carry over to men's sports too. But this is a revolutionary time for women's sports. The argument's always been that they don't put women's sports on because they're not popular enough on television. That's a tautology. They're not popular enough because there's not enough games on to expose people to women's sports. So it just keeps going round and round. But this is a breakthrough, and you saw the women doing endorsements. You saw marketing companies. And maybe it'll transfer over to the WNBA, and we'll have our first big women's sports league.
Now, do you think the WNBA has a plan to really take advantage of Caitlin Clark, or are they still trying to catch up?
No, there was no catching up. Caitlin Clark's been this way all season. So they had sellout crowds, they had all that. WNBA's had a long time to contemplate what to do coming out of this conference. They started it off with a draft day where although it didn't have the ratings of the NFL draft, they did some serious star building. So they had a number of players, and that's what draws people to sports. Backstory where you know the player, you feel like a kinship, or at least you feel like you know them.
Now, I know you're pressed for time, so I'm going to have one last question. We're going to move on. But when do we get the NFL draft back to New York? I am so sick of this. Excuse me for a second. I am so sick of this moving around. I love New York. I have my habits. I love Radio City. I love the whole doggone thing. What? I mean, okay, going to Detroit, great. But every time I have to go there, I have to get used to, it's a new setup, it's a new place. Everything is new because they're building new stuff. And there's always a malady somewhere.
I've got bad news for you. I love the draft in New York too, but the ability to rotate that around to when will it be in New York? 1 out of 32 years. In New York. Those because they're having massive crowds like in Kansas City or in Indianapolis, wherever they hold it. And it's been a hugely popular moving it around. I'm a purist too. I love sitting back in the green room at Madison Square Garden where I had, 8 players who were the first pick in the first round of the draft. I enjoyed it. New York's New York. But this has been a big boon for the league. It's paid off for them in terms of increased popularity. 130 million people watch the Super Bowl. And those days are gone. So you can put
Oh, don't tell me. Oh, I'm sorry.
put it on a shelf with the BlackBerry and the rotary phone and everything else.
I had it laid out every year. I'd have dinner at 21, which by the way is closed. Never to reopen again. That was my Wednesday night dinner.
Yeah, except that pretty soon you'll be talking about where you had dinner in Kansas City or Detroit, and you'll establish new traditions. It's
yeah. Do you try to think I'm sounding old lately? Thanks a lot.
no, no, 70's new 40.
I'll keep that in mind. I think I'll change my tune when I get a new hip. Thanks, Leigh.
Just remember, hyperbaric oxygen, stem cells, NanoV, red, white, and blue light, and cognitive treatments like TMS and Nest-free brain training that can keep your brain stimulated and much more youthful. So you were born at the right time because you're catching the beginning of this.
And on that note, what about diet too, right? I mean, I've got, yes, you should do a newsletter on that. I catch your comments every week, but you should say more about that because for people like myself, born on the greatest year ever, 1962, I was born a year after not Tom Cruise, but there is something about how to live longer and how to live well that I think we need to communicate even better than we're doing.
I keep trying.
You're doing a great job. All right. Hey, so stick around in the background, Leigh. Hey, everybody. More on the NFL draft red carpet. I'm doing a tips. I'm giving tips on each draftee as to what they should wear for the carpet. All right. That ends this stream. Leigh, don't have to move a muscle. Thank you, everybody.